My name is Samantha Arbello. I am a Feldenkrais practitioner with a background in massage therapy and Pilates. My mission is to simply help you move in your most efficient ways so that you don't get yourself into patterns of tension or pain. So let's talk about sitting. The reality is, life requires a lot of sitting. We should be thinking about trying to move more throughout our days. But if you're working a 9 to 5 job, the reality is you're sitting for many hours, and you should be getting up at least every 30 minutes to an hour to get up and move your body, break free from that pattern of sitting. But another very important thing is to make sure that you're sitting in your most efficient way. You have to find the use of your pelvis when you're sitting. You have to find how you sit in a place that allows your spine to feel comfortable and doesn't overwork your spinal muscles. So there's a couple of things that come into play when we're sitting. The position of our pelvis and how the position of our pelvis affects our spine. So let's say you're somebody that tends to sit with your pelvis tilted backwards. You tend to tuck your tailbone under you. You're rolling back onto your sit bones. More than likely, your spine is following that position. Your spine is probably rounding back with that, and your shoulders rounding forward, and your head is going forward. Oftentimes, this will be a lead to forward head posture, but that's for another video. But let's say you are somebody that sits like this, okay? There's nothing wrong with this position. The problem occurs when we stay here for too long, or when we don't move our pelvis, when we need to do a different type of movement. For example, you're sitting like this and you need to reach for something across your desk, but you don't do so by moving your pelvis. You just go like this. Well, now you're having to overextend from your shoulder, and your spine is limited to how much it can move forward because you just kept your pelvis back here. So that starts to put a lot of wear and tear on the back muscles. We tend to see a lot of fatigue, and then a lot of times, because our brain builds a habit around what we do on a constant basis, we start to stand and mimic that posture. You might notice that you're standing with your pelvis rounded back and your spine rounded back and your shoulders are slouched. On the contrary, sometimes people sit with their pelvis tilted too far forward, and that causes the spine to actually overextend. And that actually activates a lot of back muscles because the spinal muscles are responsible for bringing the spine into this extension. So if you're always with your pelvis like this, always in this forward tilt, well, your back muscles are they're very turned on. They're having to be in a very active state for long periods. And again, if you need to reach for something and your pelvis is already in this forward position, when you go to reach for something, the likelihood is, in order for you to reach forward, you're just going to extend your spine more because the base of your spine, which is your pelvis, is already in that position, which promotes the spine to extend. So what we want to do when we sit is to find a neutral ground for our pelvis. It's a little bit different for everybody. It is important that we each sense what is our individual neutral ground for our pelvis, or middle ground for the pelvis. The place to which the pelvis is in a position that allows you to move your pelvis in multiple directions at any given time. So let's focus on finding a neutral pelvis while in seated. So let's first just figure out the sit bones. This is a bit of a funny way to find them, but I find that it has worked really well for my clients. So you're going to sit on your hands. And what you're doing when you sit on your hands is you're trying to feel for your sit bones. Okay, once you feel those bones into your hands, you're now going to tilt your pelvis backwards. If your pelvis is already tilted backwards, because that is your habit, then go ahead and just stay there and start to feel and notice what position your sit bones are pointing in. If you were to think about your sit bones like flashlights, what position are those lights flashing towards when your pelvis is rounded backwards? Just be curious about it. You don't need to necessarily know the answer. We're going to develop it further. From here, bring your sit bones to point towards the floor so that your pelvis comes out of that rounded back position. Once your sit bones are pointing to the floor, you'll probably notice that the bones are pointing right into your fingers, and it's probably a little bit uncomfortable. So don't worry, we're not going to stay here for long. Now tilt your pelvis forward so that it creates a little bit of an arch into your lower back. And you might notice that the sit bones, actually, you don't feel them too much onto your hands. So now we're going to just go from the rounded pelvis to the arched pelvis, but you're going to stop in the middle, in your middle. So you're going to round your back. You can lower your head. You can relax your shoulders forward. You're going to let your pelvis tilt backwards. And notice the position that your sit bones are in, those bones that are protruding into your fingers. Hopefully not too uncomfortable, which, by the way, if it's too uncomfortable, just take your hands out. Bring your pelvis out of that position until you feel the bones are pointing down into your fingers or down towards the floor. Then roll your pelvis forward so the bones feel like they're pointing backwards and you don't feel too much pressure on your hands anymore. Continue rounding backwards, coming back to the center where the bones are pointing to the floor, and then tilting your pelvis forward so that the bones are tilting backwards. So as you round your spine and your pelvis rolls backwards, your sit bones tilt forward. And then when you bring your pelvis out of that position to a middle place, the sit bones have a point where they're pointing to the floor. And when you tilt your pelvis forward, your sit bones are now tilting backwards. And notice that as you go in between those motions, your spine can easily follow a similar position to what your pelvis is doing. And now start to think about, where is the middle between these two extremes? Where is that really soft middle where your sit bones are clearly pointing to the floor? Once you find that, take your hands out, wiggle them, because they might have lost a little circulation. I'm sorry. But like I said, you could have taken them out sooner. All joking aside, just rest now in this position and notice if you have a greater awareness of your sit bones. Can you feel them on this chair? And can you keep them in a position that has them tilted down towards the floor? Let's refine the position of our spine above our neutral pelvis. And we're going to do this by taking one hand to the chest and the other hand to the forehead. And we're going to repeat the pelvis rolling backwards and forward. But now as you do that, you're going to incorporate a movement of your head and your chest. So as you roll your pelvis backwards, lower your head down and use your hand on your chest to guide your chest down as well, going just to the point that feels comfortable and easy. And then from your pelvis, start to bring your pelvis to a neutral place, to that middle place where the sit bones are pointing to the floor. And then start to roll your pelvis forward of that. And as you do, lift your head slightly up so that you're looking up the wall, and use your hand on your chest to gently push your chest up. And we're going to go between those two motions, the rounded spine and the arched spine, using your hands on your forehead and your chest to guide your chest and your forehead to follow the direction that your pelvis is going, but thinking about the motion coming from your pelvis. Now, as you continue to do this, every time you do this, take a pause at the middle place and then continue on to the next position. So you're finding that neutral alignment of your spine and your pelvis in one cohesive line. And then you're going to the rounded position of the pelvis. And then you're coming back to your neutral ground. And then going into the extension. Close your eyes as you do this. And now start to think about this. So we're still doing the motion. Of course, lower your arms down at any point if you get tired. There's no need to fatigue yourself. It's actually not conducive to your learning. But continuing on, so you're rounding, lowering your head, lowering your chest, bringing yourself to the middle ground, pausing for a second or two, and then tilting your pelvis forward, lifting your head and your chest. Close your eyes as you're doing this, and now start to pay attention to the sensations of your back and your abdomen. And just notice what position of your pelvis and your spine near that middle place do you not feel your abdomen or your spinal muscles active. So what you are doing is you're sensing where is it that you align your pelvis and your spine together, that you don't feel the spinal muscles having to overwork and you don't feel the abdominal muscles having to overwork. The ideal sitting position is a place where you don't feel your muscles, because it's not conducive to survival to feel your muscles active. They should just be working in the background. So once you've explored that a couple of times, go ahead, let go, place your hands onto your knees, and just see if you have a sense of sitting in a place where the spinal muscles are relaxed, your abdominal muscles are relaxed, but you're stacked above your pelvis efficiently and strong because your sit bones are pointing to the floor. So the pelvis is like an upright bowl that's sitting well on its base, and your spine is stacking nicely above that base. So this is step one to figuring out how to sit with more ease and efficiency. Just finding that neutral place of the pelvis and your spine. And then from there, we're going to play with a bunch of different motions within that neutral ground so that we never get stuck with our pelvis in one position. We are always moving our spine from the motions of our pelvis. It is equal weight distribution. It allows us to transmit force through the body equally throughout all the bones, joints, and muscles so that we're not overworking one specific area of ourselves. So the next time that you find yourself sitting at the office or sitting for a prolonged period of time, just observe, where is your pelvis? And is your pelvis with the sit bones pointing towards the floor? Is your spine stacked above your pelvis in a way that allows your spinal muscles to be quiet, allows your abdominal muscles to be relaxed, and you to be comfortable? Follow so that you don't miss my next video regarding sitting. Ideally, you figure out how to sit without needing a backrest.